Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the Jodo Cast, your home for Star Wars gaming. I'm Joe Lutovsky, and joining me, as usual, is Leo Andre.
Hi.
Kurt Larson.
Hey.
And we have a special guest this time. Joining us is Richard Early, owner and proprietor and lord of Paradox Comics and Cards from Fargo, North Dakota. And we're going to be talking Star Wars Unlimited today, so we're skipping over all the usual,
Fluff.
like we have a guest.
Shenanigans.
Yeah, we have a guest, so we can't let him see how we normally live. You know what I mean? So let's hop right into talking about Star Wars Unlimited. Leo, as our chief card game officer, why don't you walk us through what we're talking about, because I think you're on top of the game more than the rest of us. I'm peeping all the spoilers, but I haven't been probably as on top of it as you.
Yeah, you bet. So, hey, how you doing, Rich?
I'm doing really good, and don't worry, I've done like a gajillion of my own podcasts, and all we do is talk too long. So I get it. So
Yeah, so we wanted to have you on here today, Rich, just because, I mean, we always look at these games, Star Wars Unlimited specific today, from a fan point of view. But we kind of wanted to get a retailer's perspective here, especially, given Fantasy Flight's history with Star Wars card games and just kind of some of their card games in general. I think we all know this is now their third Star Wars card game they've put out. There's been other card games they've run and gotten canceled. There's been just ones I've played, Netrunner, L5R, numerous others. So
this is only their second randomized game, though, right?
Well,
Star Wars
no,
Destiny being the first.
No, they had some CCGs back before they started doing the whole LCG thing. Like Game of Thrones started out as a collectible card game before it became a living card game. So Rich, what was your reaction when you first heard that they were going for a third try here?
well, my initial reaction was laughter. I mean, I'll be honest, but and that was literally knowing absolutely nothing about the game at that time. I just thought, who are they kidding? Was just the first thing that crossed my mind. But boy, have they won me over. The only question that I've really got left, and I do like how they're approaching it, is are they going to be able to deliver the print run that's necessary, but also kind of hits that sweet spot of not overprinting the game? So, because it goes both ways, right? Like not printing enough kills a game, but printing too much also essentially kills a game too. Yeah. So it's really hard to find that balance.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want a Lorcana situation, but you also don't want to. I forget what the game was. Some people were talking about how like the first couple sets they way overprinted, and people were buying booster boxes for like $20. So.
Yeah, we've had a lot of that. Well, the era that we're in is really interesting, this has happened across the board in the pop culture entertainment industries. Because of Kickstarter and all these other things, the floodgates are open. There is no more kind of gatekeeping by a major manufacturer or publisher on what hits the marketplace. And it's awesome. It's empowered people on a level we've absolutely never seen before. So while we've been through waves of games coming out, small games being released, trying to hit big, going all the way back to the 90s, we've had these waves 2, 3, 4 times. This one's really different because of how big the marketplace has become to reach card game players. It's just a completely different situation, and on manufacturing and on the player end. And that I just find, and I think Star Wars and Lorcana both, are really in position for interesting results, right? So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting angle to it, honestly. Like you said, too little or too much could both be really negative for the. So the too much case is like basically if the market's flooded, product becomes so cheap and undervalued that a store basically won't be able to profit off it and won't buy it anymore, or like what does that look like?
Yeah, I think a combination of things. You guys want to buy a booster pack that's worth something, and I don't want the booster pack to be overpriced. But if the cards in the packs have no value, there's no inspiration for you to buy them. I mean, a lot of people. Yeah, the collectability aspect is there. You know, it's TCGs, CCGs, right? So they're collectible card games or trading card games, but the point is, and I think here FFG to me has done it. I'm tangenting a little bit. I apologize. I'm going to try to answer the question, but I always do this. But one of the things that impressed me once we saw the breakdown of products and the breakdown of single cards and the variations on single cards, they did a really good job of thinking about what makes a chase card, what makes a card special. But I think that's really important. It's not that we want to be jealous of the guy who rips the one card out of the 12 boxes. It's not that we want you to buy 12 boxes. It's that when your turn comes and you do pull that card, it's worth something, if that makes sense, right? And that's sort
Yeah.
of, I want to say it's sort of aspirational in a lot of ways. Yes, it's getting you to buy a booster pack, but the point is the result of you buying a booster pack should be good for you. If it's not good for you, then it's not good for the store, FFG, anybody involved. Does that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and they did a really good job of layering collectability. I mean, Leo mentioned Lorcana. This is one of the things. I mean, Lorcana was designed by a guy who designed games in the 2000s, and so I keep joking like it looks like a card game from 2005. Well, it kind of is a card game from 2005. And actually, I like Lorcana a lot. I think they've done a lot of things really well. They didn't do their chase values very well, and it's going to hurt them as time goes on. On the flip side, I think Star Wars Unlimited, these guys designing this game and thinking about organized play, they have spent 4 years developing this game, and they analyzed every corner of the card game marketplace. They've got experience, and they knew how to approach it.
Yeah, like you said, it sounds really hard to find that sweet spot. Is it something many games achieve, in your opinion? Like typically, is it pretty rare to hit that sweet spot?
I mean, it's almost impossible. It would be almost sheer luck,
Yeah.
because it means you would have a crystal ball to anticipate what your demand would exactly be, right?
Mhm.
And that's just not going to happen. So the guys at Ravensburger, it's just clear they just didn't have enough press time. They weren't expecting what they were expecting. They were a puzzle board game company, and it reminds me of the early days of the last Star Wars game with the
Destiny.
dice. Destiny.
Yeah.
Oh my god! I was gonna say Decipher, and then I blanked. I couldn't get back to Destiny.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I remember I got 2 boxes at launch from you, and then that was it. You weren't able to get any in for how long?
Yep.
And other than, I mean, luckily you had the foresight. You held back some stuff for like us doing some prize support, for doing some organized play stuff in the store. But yeah, it was. I think the game. We had a really good group locally for Destiny right off the bat. Like I remember when you did the pre-release. I think we darn near filled up your event center for pre-release for that game.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact numbers, and all that software is gone. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It did really well. So, but
Um,
that's the perfect example of they screwed that one up. Now, one of the reasons I think they're doing a really good job with looking at the print run here is they opened up the window for us to put in numbers. We could put in tentative numbers for all the products, but they weren't looking to lock in their numbers. What they were looking to do is see, okay, how can we sort of gauge the demand? The only thing is, you can't ask me in October what I think of a game coming out at March. Even as much as I like Star Wars Unlimited, I'm just not in a position to know what my financial situation looks like. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all about the players. If you guys are coming in and wanting the game, I mean, you're not coming in October wanting the game. You're coming in on March 1st or whatever pre-release is going to be and wanting the game. And so we just have no idea. We don't know. I am no smarter than those guys at FFG. Well, they're way smarter than I am because they have data. So I just make it up. You were asking, so like the Lorcana example is beautiful because we've seen what happens when there's not enough product. Now, I as a store, I mean, I have sold a lot of Lorcana, not a lot. I've sold the Lorcana that I had at market prices, and market prices are all high. And so, and retailers have taken a ton of flack over Lorcana versus I think any game I've ever seen. And I think part of that is we got a lot of new players. I can tell you in my experience, even today, I'm selling Lorcana to people who have never played a card game before in their lives. And that is awesome. That's exactly what we want Lorcana to do. Now, we want it to do that at $6.99, the actual, MSRP of the booster packs, right? And so people will say, oh, you're marking this stuff up. Well, that doesn't do me any good. Okay, I'm making more profit on too little product right now, but that doesn't help me because I'm making it so that there are a bunch of people who will not buy the product, will not get their hands on it, won't build decks, won't be able to play. That does not help me. That doesn't help the players. It doesn't help the marketplace. What helps me is when we get it right and the value holds and we all are happy, with the outcome. So that's sort of that side of it. On the deflation side, yes, a store's got to turn a profit. So to some degree, you're absolutely right. If a booster box is flooded, my incentive to bring it in, if it's going to sell for $5 over my cost, is very low. But honestly, kind of so is your incentive to buy it, because then it's being driven by the value of the singles and the amount of people who are playing it. I mean, that's what's going to push that. It's pure supply and demand in this market. It's not an MSRP thing. It's a collectability thing. So it's a supply versus demand. So if people aren't playing and there's too much of it, then the singles aren't worth anything. And why are you buying booster packs anyway? Right. So that's sort of the problem with the overproduction side.
Yeah, I'm buying booster packs because I like Star Wars, and I think I'm kind of the I've always been very averse to the like secondary market economy of a lot of these games. I'm like, I just want to like play the game and not worry about this one card being worth such and such,
and wheeling and dealing and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear like the nitty gritty of sort of that being such a driving force in all of these games that they have to consider when making them.
Well, I think even for a casual buyer, though, it's good for the game to hold value because it's going to continue to be produced. And now, I'll give you some examples too. In 2014, they did this very publicly, but Wizards of the Coast had commissioned a gigantic study on how and why people play Magic the Gathering. And what they found was the way Magic had been run and operated for 20 years was actually only targeting kind of the smallest potential audience of customers. So what they started doing then is they wanted to turn the game into a more casual thing instead of a more competitive thing. And this caused a major earthquake. I mean, this up through, like, I'd opened 3 years earlier, I'd opened an event center. I doubled my space and opened an event center specifically to run Pro Tour qualifiers for Magic the Gathering and Magic the Gathering pre-releases, right? And all of a sudden, that was essentially all gone 3 years later. But now we're 9 years later, and we've got things like Universes Beyond and Commander and all these sorts of things. And I mean, like, my store has better player turnout, or metrics, they call them, today than it did in 2019 before the pandemic, in the before times. And so it's working, and we sell the majority of cards we sell. And I think I used to anecdotally say this, most of the cards I sell are not too competitive, people. But a game is not going to continue to be produced if there's not that, I guess the right term is value chain. But I totally hear you on just wanting to play and not wanting to worry about, like, is my card worth $20 or whatever. Yeah, I mean, you're that's absolutely key. So,
well, and I think Unlimited's kind of working to sort of satisfy both potential markets, where I think a lot of the people looking for value out of their cards, they're going to be chasing the hyperspace variants, the showcase variants, things like that. Um, so, like, just like the standard print of a card is going to get devalued a little bit compared to those rare variants. So, for someone like Joe, it's hopefully prices on some of that stuff is still going to be sort of in the range where if you want the card, you can get it.
Just to get a playable deck, basically. Yeah, with the cards you want.
Yeah, because
Right,
I remember that in Destiny where it was like, oh, I wish I had Palpatine. Okay, a single Palpatine is like $40 or whatever. I'm not gonna. Whereas in Unlimited, hopefully it's gonna be like, well, a single Palpatine isn't gonna be that expensive, and what's gonna be
Leo,
expensive is like the hyperspace Palpatine or whatever.
Yeah.
right. And Leo's right. I mean, this is one of the things I was going to say. One of the smart things about it is, we've also seen this in other card games. When you add a level of rarity, what tends to happen is the people who are looking to make money and flip the stuff, they therefore open more products. So every time you add a level of rarity, you push down the value of the last highest level of rarity. So yeah, most likely the regular rares will be easier to purchase because of those chase cards. It's sort of the net result. So, but you didn't want to talk only about card value.
Yeah.
I mean, do you find like overall, in your experience, does having those like cheaper non-special cards, does that help the market from your perspective, that it is easier for like new people to get in and get playable decks, or how does that part feel to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, it just, I mean, I hate to make it all value proposition. It just depends on what the can people. I mean, single cards have to get into the market somehow. Someone has to buy a booster box, and someone has to open the booster box, and someone has to get those cards into the market, right? And it need, so who's going to do that? And that is where the value's got to be more than, even let's just say my cost, right? The value of the singles inside the box have got to exceed the booster box that I'm going to open. Otherwise, why am I going to do it? Other than I love Star Wars players and Star Wars games, and I want to support them. But if it can't do that, then it's tough. But I think they've countered that here really well, Leo. I love the 2 starter decks. And I love that there are unique cards in the starter decks. There's enough copies of them, and I just think they've really done those starters really, really well.
Yeah, it's like old Fantasy Flight loved putting unique cards in starter items, but then only giving you one of something you could have 3 or 4 copies of, forcing you to buy 3 or 4 copies of that starter item and get a bunch of other duplicates that you don't need. So I'm really happy they've kind of ended that practice at the company. So to kind of pivot away from all the talk of price and value, another thing a game needs is people to play it, right? You got to build a community, which is always can be kind of tough sometimes with a new game. Now, that being said, I think it's heartening for us to see Fantasy Flight also rolling this game out with such a comprehensive and thought out ahead of time plan for organized play, which is something we haven't seen, or to a degree we haven't seen with their other games in the past, really.
Yeah, and this might be right from the get-go the best organized play system going. I'm not familiar with OP for every game because there's so many games now, but for the most part, this looks like just about the best, most robust. It's a very 2010 again Magic the Gathering organized play system, but that's really smart. That was sort of the sweet spot of Magic. That was when even like local judges from Fargo, North Dakota were going to Japan to judge world championships. And, the community was just so involved because it was such a good system.
I guess it's gonna depend a lot on if their software works. It's all like the competitive stuff's all hinging on you logging your games and like reporting and getting points that accumulate and stuff, right?
Kind of. This is not a straight points. I mean, playing at your local store on a Tuesday night for their weekly event does not earn you any points towards the store championship system, and Galaxy championships or anything. But I think they've separated those two things really well. I don't know. I don't know what Leo thinks of their, that two-tiered system.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great idea because it's it's they've got like your weekly events or whatever to for just you just show up and play. So it's very casual, gets kind of everybody involved. Kind of like, because it's like one of those things like you said that as far as like Magic goes, the most popular format at when they did that survey, they found out it's actually was the kitchen table Magic basically, and not the competitive stuff. But then they also have the what the heck's it called, the store showdown, which is kind of analogous to the old Destiny store championships, and those they're competitive, but I don't think there's tournament points at stake in those either. Just like promo cards and stuff. So it's a competitive environment, but less competitive still. That kind of gives casual players sort of a foot in, or a way to ease into the competitive stuff, which again I think is another good move.
Yeah, because I feel like a new player would be very intimidated by like points systems and qualifying and stuff, at least until they've like gotten more serious about it, right? So
Well, I mean, I think that's a good Joe question, kind of, because, like, so Joe, you're not looking for value; you're looking for competition. But are you looking for, casual competition, or are you looking for that sort of aspirational competition that comes with like being a little, I don't know, I don't want to say bloodthirsty. I'm not calling you bloodthirsty,
Yeah.
man.
I definitely lean more towards the casual side, and I always feel that way. But I I'm going to Worlds for Legion for a second time the next. So it's like, well, somehow I find myself in the more competitive scenes anyways. So I'm looking forward to doing like both sides of their casual, competitive, organized play and seeing which one feels more fun.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times, like a highly competitive environment can suck the fun out of a game for me. It depends on the community and how people are treating the game. And sometimes that's just different, like, town to town, where it's like, oh, these guys like take it a little too seriously for my taste, or they're just, not playing it for fun. I don't know. I'm excited to try both and see if I'm going to be doing everything or sticking with just one of the two tracks.
Yeah. But like you said, it will be interesting to see how their software / website turns out, because all the tournament play stuff is going to be integrated into their website. You're going to register your decks on there. You'll be able to track your tournament points on there. And then they've said that they're working on brand new tournament software for the stores for the game.
I hope so, because FFG software has traditionally
Yeah,
sucked. No, I don't know.
Yeah.
I shouldn't. Say
I'm
that.
I'm
It's just,
wondering if that, because it's traditionally been not great, that almost makes me think it's going to be quite solid this time around, because everything with Unlimited seems to be like, hey, people who doubted Fantasy Flight, how do you like this? Turns out it's really good now. So hopefully they're putting that much effort into like paying software developers a lot of money to get this all ironed out before the game launches.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
Because it would not be a good look to be like, okay, the game's here. Oh, and all this stuff just still doesn't work well.
yeah, it could really mess it all up.
I definitely get like PTSD flashbacks to the old official X-wing list builder that
Oh
Fantasy
man.
Flight put out with second edition, and that thing was just the most unusable piece of garbage software web app I've ever used.
I mean, it's the type of thing that as a software developer, I go like, why would a board game company be trying to make their own apps for these things anyways, or even paying a contractor to? Like, you'd think they would be more like a, here's a general tournament or whatever list building type software that would just work across a lot of games, and then they don't have to risk their whole launch on this dedicated application or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's just one of those things that a corporation. It's the thing the corporation doesn't want to spend money on, but it's also one of the most critical things to making it work. You're totally correct. So
Magic kind of rolled out like a tournament app not that long ago,
yeah,
didn't they? Where like you can do
the companion
pairings.
app, it works
Like
right. It works fairly well. You get your pairings on your phone. You register for the tournaments on your phone.
Hmm.
It doesn't. The one dot that's not quite connected, and I assume the FFG won't either, is you can't pay for your event there. So there's still an
Yeah.
awkward sort of second step involved, right? But it does work pretty well. So now you guys, okay, so everybody here is pretty much a miniatures player, I believe. Am I right here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
one of the things I thought when I first started Star Wars Unlimited too, because they just put out the 2-player Star Wars card game
The
as
deck
well.
builder.
Yeah,
Yep.
really good little game. Excellent.
Oh yeah,
game.
it's great.
Well thought out, really well designed, plays well. Love the force mechanic. Can't really say enough good things about that. Thought the price point was a little high, but that's true of everything in the world right now. So, and so then this comes out. But when Shatterpoint got announced and was coming out, I thought, my God, like what niche could there possibly be for yet another Star Wars, minis game with everything that was on the market? So that often, that's another thing I think is like, how far can you subdivide one genre of fans into different games and keep those fans involved in buying this newest thing? So I don't know how many of the minis games you guys play. I don't know if Shatterpoint has resonated, or would you have time to play or money to buy Star Wars Unlimited if your focus was on minis?
That's something I'm gonna have to figure out in March because I really like Shatterpoint. I still get Legion stuff, and I want to get Unlimited. So that's
Yeah.
I think the plan
That's
is
tough.
we hit 1,000,000 YouTube subscribers, and that will be funding all of our
Oh, there you go.
Unlimited stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the plan. And if that doesn't pan out, we'll have to figure something else out. But it also depends on the cadence of the releases of all of that. Because right now Shatterpoint has slowed down a lot. There's no new product coming out until January, I think. So maybe that's going to pick up. Maybe it'll be like an every other month new release. So I guess that all depends. Because I want to do it all, but like you said, it's going to be some picking and choosing to be done.
It's both money and time,
Yeah.
so time is yeah. I mean, and that the organized play systems in general. I mean, you go back to when X-Wing started in Fargo Moorhead. I mean, remember we had early X-Wing regionals and I think we had an X-Wing regional that had, 90-ish players. We had those guys who
Yeah.
came up we had guys who flew up from LA to play because there wasn't anything yet. We didn't quite realize there'd be a lot of them that could just play locally and things, but that was crazy. But I remember too I thought I'd come up with a really good weekly thematic ongoing sort of league play for X-Wing, and it just didn't matter. Like at a certain point, we just lost mass of players, and that's something that can happen a lot in organized play.
Yeah, and I think we see that with like all the minis games. You get like a lot of interest, a lot of people that want to play, and then it's hard to keep that momentum going consistently because like you'll have like, I think you're seeing it right now with Shatterpoint where people will be like, oh, we had this great Shatterpoint night, but then people don't come back next week or next month or whatever.
I think it's a lot harder for miniatures games because it requires so much more time out of people because you gotta build it, paint it, lug it to the store. Whereas a card game, you can just build
You don't have to
decks
set up a
when you're-
board or
Yeah,
anything.
when you're in a work meeting and then
in like your hoodie pocket or whatever.
right, and then the one of the organized play things, aren't they like? Don't they give out little promo cards like every time?
Yeah, it's actually
Like, every
actually
week?
going to be a pack of like it's like a
Like a
three
booster pack.
card organized play booster pack.
Yeah, and the cards in that pack are like only found in these, like, hey, you showed up, here's your pack kind of thing. So that's another thing that's harder with miniatures games, is there's less content to like try and like incentivize people to come, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always thought that when we got X-Wing League kits, it's like, well, there isn't really anything to sell if you're or to promo, if you have the mini, you can play around with like the cards a little bit, right? But
That's not the exciting part of the game. It's the cards.
right.
Yeah.
I'm still a sucker for promo cards in these games. Or tokens.
Mm.
But yeah, I do think the promo packs are really clever for Star Wars Unlimited. Yet another thing on their list of positives. I can't think of one negative thing about the game. I've been wanting to talk about just one thing about gameplay. Like, I'm never going to say anything brilliant about Star Wars Unlimited gameplay that hasn't already been said on 1,000 places on YouTube or whatever. But, like, I love the design of the two battlefields. I love fighting in space and on the ground, because it didn't occur to me until I was watching somebody's spoiler reviews, and they were talking about one card. They were talking about was Dooku, and then like two cards later they were talking about the Millennium Falcon, and I just said, like, so Dooku's a 7/7, and the Millennium Falcon is a 3/4, and it just went off in my brain that it's beautiful, because you can scale a 7/7 guy on the battlefield does not have anything to do with a 3/4 thing in space. And so it's like one of the first games for a card game version of Star Wars where you have a way to account for like a Star Destroyer versus like an Ewok. And I just thought it's just brilliantly scaled in that way, going all the way back to Decipher.
That was a thing people always disliked about, like the LCG that Fantasy Flight put out. To a lesser degree, some people had the same complaints about Destiny, but the LCG was really bad because it was just everything was just kind of like in a jumble, and you sort of threw it at each other. So
I just think that was like one of the big, like, this is weird moments for me that I always still think about, is literally when I had an Ewok destroy a Super Star Destroyer in a battle, and I was like, okay, but like, how did this happen? Because I'm trying to tell a little story here on the table as I'm playing, and it was hard to do when that happens.
And it feels very Star Wars too. Like, Battle of Endor is like, okay, there's this battle going here, and there's this battle in space at the same time, and they both matter. But yeah, they don't overlap either. So yeah.
Yeah, and the tension that's created in the game too. The one thing, and I don't know that this will matter all that much, but because in Unlimited you could play Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker in the same deck. You can play them together, which, going back to Decipher days, is not a thing you could do. Right?
Yeah, pretty untypical for Star Wars.
But you have to pay a penalty, because of the clever way that they've used bases and leaders to essentially reduce your costs. When you're playing like in your color, so to speak. So you can play Vader, but you're going to pay a lot to play Vader. Is the only thing. So
that's cool, and that actually reminds me a lot of Shatterpoint, because when they announced Shatterpoint, and that's another thing, is you can have whoever on the same team. It doesn't matter. There's no restrictions on like faction or force alignment or whatever. And so it was like, well, that feels weird. But then you put it together and you're like, well, if you put, Obi-Wan and Darth Vader on the same team, they don't work together, because all of these characters have abilities that synergize with, people who they should be hanging out with. And so I was like, oh, okay. So now it almost seems like, I don't know, it just felt very similar, where the game is giving you the potential to have these kind of Fantasyland team ups, but there's drawbacks that can force you to be a little bit more thematic along the way. I'm wondering if any of that came from Lucasfilm, because there's just, it just seems so new. Like, okay, now there's 2 games this year that are doing that, and I don't think we've really seen anything like that before. Where there's always been like, I'm the dark side, you're the light side. I'm Rebels, you're Empire. Like, there's never been like that kind of like mix and matchiness up until now.
I wonder if it allows for better game design space rather than having to be restricted and then think of how everything is a point and counterpoint or something. Like maybe it just opens up game design.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I mean, I don't remember if they've ever specifically discussed that, but I mean, whenever you I've heard the designers talk about like, why did you make this choice? Why did you make that choice? You could, how come you didn't do it the way it's always been? Almost always their answer was, well, initially we started out doing it the way you would think we would, but after going through X number of iterations, we finally figured out, you know what, this actually works better. And I think, just like you said, that they've spent the last 3-4 years here, really honing and fine tuning a lot of stuff with this game, and I think it shows.
It's got to
Yeah,
help collecting too, right? Because like
Right.
now you don't feel restricted to one faction. You're hypothetically interested in all the cards at that point.
Yeah, or
But I think
you end up with awkward things like where you have to bring a light side and a dark side deck, and
Yeah.
you swap
Yes.
back and forth between rounds, and
I was thinking about that too.
Never,
Yep.
It always felt weird, like like especially if you're trying to do like a best of 3 or something like that. Well, it's like if you win for your light side, then your dark side, and then or you always end up playing like one deck unevenly from the other and stuff. It was
Well, and from a game design point of view, you've got to keep both decks competitive. And I'm just thinking that's a really hard thing, but that's true from a player point of view. Yeah, having to bring those 2 different decks or 2 different factions, that's a really awkward way to come and play in an event. Kind of like thematic, but they must have just decided that the thematic part of that wasn't worth the hassle that came with it. So one of the other things I noticed about Unlimited looking at cards is it's got a lot of I really think this looks like the best designed and Destiny. I really only am deeply familiar with like the first set or two, so forgive me if I say something that actually isn't true, but I think this looks like one of the best designed limited format set I've ever seen for Star Wars. And that they've really consciously built a set you can draft by including leaders and bases and into packs and things like that make it draftable. But there's simple cards that are like just these little like +1/+1 for a turn cards or whatever. I mean, those are limited cards. They're not in there for anybody's constructed deck. They're literally in there to play limited with and I think even specifically to draft, because your commons well and you start drafting, you can know cards you might be expecting to get to build your decks around. So
yeah, this was the first time they built anything with limited in mind. I mean, yeah, they may have done that some with the last few sets of Destiny, but Destiny, they didn't even come out with the draft kits for Destiny until like the 3rd set, 4th set, something like that. I forget exactly when it was, but
isn't it unlimited?
Oh, yeah, I never heard that joke before. But again, I think that's again just another thing is you get so many different ways to play the game. Casual, competitive, constructed, or limited. I mean, I when I started playing like Magic Arena during COVID, and that's the first time I really started drafting stuff, and I came to like doing drafting. So I'm looking forward to drafting with Unlimited here a lot. I did it a tiny little bit with Destiny, but by the time the draft kits and stuff started rolling out, the game was kind of on its last legs already then, so never get to do that one much.
I mean, the other thing that's funny now is because of YouTube and influencers and podcasters like you guys, like we can already basically have like there's YouTubers who have already like they've built Star Wars Unlimited decks, like they're already working on meta, like the game doesn't even exist yet essentially, and people are already working on what the meta game is going to be, and it just kind of it cracks me up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, I just remember reading arguments about, what cards are broken and what cards are just like they're so bad they're unplayable. And this was when like after like the first two previews and we had like a total of like 20 cards, and it's like how can you really judge anything based on that small of a sample pool when you
Yeah,
don't really know
for
what
real.
else is out there, but people were doing it.
Well, plus you want to have, I had a guy. I mean, I remember back in the day when we ran HeroClix tournaments all the time. There was one particular guy. He would only play comic accurate HeroClix teams. So it didn't matter if something would work well with something else. That was not what he was going to do. So the ability to build like in Lorcana, like you can build like a princess deck, and things like that. So so I think that ability to very much do what Joe like I used to it's been 30 years, but I used to walk through the room when people were playing Star Wars Decipher, which was like the second or third card game we ever carried when Paradox first opened, Magic, and then followed by the two Decipher games. But I used to walk through and say, you guys better watch out, I got my Lando deck. And like, I mean, Lando was not. I have no idea. I assume he was terrible and not such a thing. So I still plan to make that same. I made that joke during Destiny, and probably nobody there knew what I was talking about. So.
I mean, yeah. I always personally, I love playing to theme in Constructed just because I'm not a great deck builder. So like like in Magic, I always played some sort of like tribal deck. It's always like I build. Here's my all elves deck. My all going to give you poison tokens deck or whatever. Just like or my all homerids deck. Break it. But and like in like or in the old Star Wars CCG, I had a deck that was nothing but like tiny people. So it was Yoda, Jawas, and Ewoks, and it was and the main purpose of it was the whole thing was just. I also had Luke's backpack. The backpack he carries Yoda around in Empire Strikes Back. That was a card in the game too. And so you could equip it on a character, and then a Jawa, an Ewok, or Yoda could ride that character like a vehicle. And so that was like my win condition, was just to get like two Jawas riding each other, and then I didn't care what happened in the game after that.
Yeah, your secret objective. Yeah.
Was Luke's backpack a unique item?
Yes, yeah. So you could.
I
mean,
if it was not unique, then you could have like a tower of them, right?
Well, you could still put. Yeah. So you couldn't multi backpack, unfortunately. No. But yeah, I'm looking forward to building theme decks like they just announced. Dan Green, his podcast just showed off main deck just showed off two new Thrawn related cards, the Chimera Thrawn Star Destroyer, and then an Imperial Governor card that's going to play well with Thrawn. So I'm really looking.
I just saw that on Fantasy Flight Twitter like half an hour ago. So
yeah, looking forward.
I'm already determined to. I'm going to build a Spectre deck with all the characters from Rebels, and
so I was gonna say
I don't care if it's good or not. That's going to be the deck I am chasing until I have all the cards with the Spectre tag on it.
But it is nice when it is good too, if it works out that way. But yeah, I think you got to have like a mix of those types of players for the community to feel, I don't know, balanced or whatever, right? Like if it's only meta stuff, then I don't know. The meta feels like it's stale. Maybe if it's people only caring about meta, like you got to have like surprising stuff in there too, right?
Oh, absolutely. if everybody showed up with the top 2 decks in the meta, you would not have a particularly fun time.
Yeah.
So, well, and that's another thing about Star Wars Unlimited is typically I'm not a big fan of card games whose resource mechanic is to put cards face down and then to use those, to cast your stuff, right? But man, am I a Magic player? To deploy your units. No,
Your
but
force mana.
yeah. But I think they did a really good job here of especially allowing you to put 2 cards down first. And I think just the way the turn progresses and the way they set up the the end of turn abilities rather than stuff that would normally happen at the beginning of the turn. I just think they thought about all of those things because like typically the reason I would not be a big fan of them is if you if you eliminate randomness, then for the most part, the better player is always the quote unquote more skilled player is always going to win, right? The less skilled player doesn't have that randomness factor to potentially tilt the scales in their favor. And I'm simplifying. I'm way oversimplifying when I say the better or worse player, but it is true,
Yeah.
right? And so that random element, that's why it's there because it's random. But I feel like Unlimited and having watched people play a bunch of games on YouTube channels and stuff like I don't know, it looks good. It looks like it's been well thought out, and then combining that with like the initiative mechanic, which I just think is brilliant. I think it's one of the best mechanics I've absolutely ever seen in a card game. So
with the passing thing, however that works.
Yeah, taking it, taking the initiative, and that ends your turn, and I mean, it's just really well done. So
yeah, I feel like that's going to be one of those skills that's going to separate the good from the okay players, is knowing when to take the initiative and when to just keep playing your hand.
Well, it's a whole nother way to build a deck, right? Like, because you can probably build decks around trying to take the initiative, like trying to probably playing cheap stuff and get it, just getting board advantage as quickly as possible. Because like that's the tension in Star Wars Unlimited. You don't actually have to fight your opponent; you can just try to blow up their base, but you are probably going to lose that race really badly if you're not trying to hold the board too. So.
Mm-hmm.
Which is another game. I mean, when I first played Lorcana, I thought, oh, this is basically Keyforge, because that's what Keyforge was being the first person to forge 3 keys, and it took 7 units of whatever magic in order to forge a key. And then Lorcana is the same way. You go on these quests, you got to score 20 points, and your engagement with the other characters is over kind of controlling the board, and that's what Star Wars Unlimited is. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. Like, I really compare that to a lot of the miniatures games where in general, having more units, more activations is like almost always a huge advantage. And you can do that and still go first next round. But it's an interesting balance here that passing first, like if you have basically fewer actions to take that round, you actually get a big advantage from doing that too. So that it's kind of a neat flip on the usual type of mechanics that I'm used to, at least. I also think personally it's really cool that they're going more of that mini turn approach. I don't play enough card games, but to me it seems not typical for card games. Like usually you think of Magic where you have a million things on your turn, like the Pro ZD video about like all the different things that you trigger and the different stuff that happens, right? That feels like the typical card game. So I think that'll be good for like new players too. Be like, it's kind of really fast playing back and forth, and you're not waiting a long time on your opponent.
Yeah, you do something, I do something, so on and so forth. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It sounds fun, at least.
I mean, I hope so. I hope we have a hit. I think they've designed a really good game. I think they have a good organized play system. I think, I mean, that's an aspect of organized play that they're going after. When you go play Magic now, you're mostly going to go play a game of Commander, and it's fun and it's casual, but it isn't very aspirational, and which is fine. This is just a comparison, not a judgment on either side. But the system we have here is like, hey, I want to go to the next step of competitive play, and I want to try to be the galactic champion at the end of everything. And that's a very aspirational system. But they've also done it in such a way that the average player does have a chance to continue to advance, rather than that being something that's just sort of out of reach to even sort of start your journey, right?
Yeah.
To that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, even if you're not the best, if you put in the time, you'll earn yourself an invite if you go to enough events. So,
Yep. I mean,
there's
these
hope
are
for
these
people
are
like me.
these are kind of these are kind of lifestyles, not just hobbies. You know, these are something like nobody sits around doing hour-long plus podcasts at night because they don't because it's not a lifestyle. You know what I mean? You guys are here because you love. You guys have been. How long have you guys been friends? I mean, my goodness.
Man, it's been a long.
I think
because it's
officially next year is 10
Next-
years, right?
And is it all
Of the
officially
Jodo
Star
cast.
Wars
Of the-
card games or Star
Of the
Wars
Jodo cast.
games? Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
for the most part, actually. I mean,
It
if you
didn't-
count me and the other guy who's not on here tonight, Evan, before this we did another podcast just all about the Star Wars, the Old Republic, the MMO, the Star Wars MMO, for a few years before this. So yeah, it's been a long time. All Star Wars games all the time.
Yeah. But that's a community that comes out of that shared passion, and card games and minis games give you a way to express your Star Wars fandom by interacting with people. You know, I'm a
For sure.
comic guy, but comics are largely a solo activity. You know, you don't read a comic with someone else. You know, but you might share and show off your collection, but it's not. You know, it's a different thing, right? So,
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you're right.
you're-
It's like a group activity in a special way.
The weirdest, like most anti Joe thing happened to me the other day. Well, it happened around. Like I was playing Shatterpoint, and some other guys were over there playing Warhammer, and they're like, "Oh, this is Shatterpoint. It's cool. I've never." It's like I love Star Wars. I got Star Wars tattoos, and just something about like Star Wars board games just doesn't make sense to me, and like I don't want to do it. So I'm gonna stick with Warhammer, but it looks cool, and I was like. I didn't know how to respond. I'm like, you just like, are you the anti me? Like, what?
he plays Warhammer. It's not like that's really weird. Yeah. I mean, it's not like he doesn't
that,
play
but with
minis
characters
games,
you like,
right? Like,
yeah.
So it's not
But
like a guy.
I like what you.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Well, I like what you said, Rich. Too. It's like it is another way to enjoy Star Wars because, like, I think back honestly, all the stupid glup shittos and stuff that I know about aren't actually from watching the movies. They're from, oh yeah, I had that card or I had that mini for that guy, and that's how I know those
or I read
stupid
about
random
them
things, right?
in that role playing source book or something like that, you know.
Yeah, and
Well-
that makes me connect to the source material more than just watching the movie. Not to dump on people who do, but for me, it adds to my enjoyment in such a way that it's neat.
I never knew the Star Wars characters, even in like A New Hope. I never knew they had names until the Decipher card game. I had no clue
Yeah.
that who Dr. Ebazan was. Never, that made no sense to me whatsoever. So, you're totally right, Kurt. it's another layer to everything. So.
And like you said, then you get to share it with other people too,
Yeah.
which is cool.
I mean, Dan Green. Speaking of Dan, we've been talking a lot about Unlimited, and one of the interesting points that because I brought up a couple of concerns about the state of the Star Wars as a franchise. It's very easy to perceive Star Wars as a franchise as as sort of tarnished right now because of all the controversies that surround it. And if you don't look any deeper and just see some of the headlines or things like that, it can feel like that, right? But Dan made this great point of saying, well, really, what's happened is the Star Wars fan base has expanded so much. There's so many more corners to it than there ever used to be. So there are those people who have those opinions, but that's one segment of the, fan base, or one section of it, right? Because that's something, the other thing is, I know from my, I saw Star Wars, the original movie. I was 8 years old. I saw it in a movie theater at the Mayo, or it was at a Mayo Clinic visit in Rochester, Minnesota, and I saw it down there with my aunt and my mom. That was cool, right? I barely remember it. I do know that happened. But then by '83, there's no more Star Wars, and so if you're me and you're growing up and you love Star Wars, there's nothing between '83 and Heir to the Empire. Dark Empire from Dark Horse and Heir to the Empire, the first novel. That's it. You got this like 10-year gap. So, and I know there's shows on Disney Plus and everything, but it feels like, who is the new audience to come in and play a Star Wars card game or a Star Wars miniatures game? It feels like, where is the kid who's going to come in and discover Star Wars right now, when the franchise isn't really as alive as it is when it has movies going on, if that makes sense. So those were my two concerns: was how big can this game potentially get in a glutted card game market where there are so many things launching, and given those two things about Star Wars. But yeah, I mean, I think Dan makes a really good point, not only about how much Star Wars has grown, but then thinking about how much, like, the base of players for a card game has grown.
Yeah, I think part of it, like, my immediately thought is, I agree that when there isn't like a new movie on the horizon, sometimes it feels like, what's going on. But from my like always all in perspective, it's like, well, there's always something. And we were just talking on our Discord with a guy, and his daughter just is all into Star Wars because of the Rebels TV show, and she hasn't even seen some of the movies. She doesn't care. She's like, I don't want to watch that movie, but I love the show, and gets attached to some of these characters. And that's like, I can picture lots of kids who their Star Wars is some of these TV shows or the cartoons, and they see that those characters are in Unlimited, and they go, oh, that's amazing, because like, that's my favorite character. And I always just see, Luke and Vader, and I'm not as into them, but now I see Ezra or somebody on this trading card game. I don't know. That's one of the things I love about card games, is how many different characters you can fit into them in such a short period of time, unlike miniatures games, because it's easier to print one card than a bunch of mini plastic. And I know that's exciting, because then so many more people can get their favorite character in their deck sooner than you can get your favorite character on your Legion or Shatterpoint team, because you don't have to wait as long.
Well, and that makes sense too, because something, and I've said this on, I don't know, 50 different podcasts I've done now or whatever, but like, I was use Batman as an example, and because I talk about like the sense of ownership that a fan has, and Batman's a great example of this, because there are iterations of Batman going all the way back to 1938, but for most people like of our age, a little older, a little younger, it starts with the 60s Batman show. So you might have found Batman in the 60s show, you might have found Batman in '89, you might have found Batman in an Arkham Knights video game, Arkham Horror. You might have found Batman in a comic book. You might have found Batman on the animated series, right? Your version of the one you found first, that's always Batman to you. So that girl, Star Wars to her is Rebels. So that's awesome. Like, that makes all the sense in the world. So yeah, I mean, you're kind of right. I think I'm just thinking about it in the aggregate, or in the mass audience.
Right.
Thing. So.
Yeah, and that's also was so fascinating to me, that Shatterpoint core set, and still with all the expansions, is only featured characters from the Clone Wars era and Clone Wars cartoons specifically, which up until that point, every single Star Wars board game, at least major release, especially coming from like Fantasy Flight and stuff, had been, Luke and Vader front and center. Like, this is where we're focusing our theme. This is where this is all about. And that made sense to me, because, you're looking at the people playing the game, and they're, 30s plus or whatever. And so that makes this is the Star Wars they relate to. And now maybe we're finally getting to that point where they feel comfortable putting out a game that's just showcasing Clone Wars characters for now, because enough people like can relate to that and go, yeah, I like that guy. which I think is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. That's a huge evolution of the game. I mean, I remember when that's interesting too, because the first time I went to Galaxy's Edge at Disney World, the only time I went, I was super excited to go. I had a great time, but I was mildly disappointed that it was sequel era stuff rather than original era stuff, and I thought with that was a branding issue.
I think part of it,
yeah.
because I was literally just there for the very first time a couple days ago, and I just got back, and part of it I think is because that place, they had such intentions to keep it so in universe and like canon, as opposed to like Avengers Campus is like not trying to stick with the canon of the MCU. It's just like adjacent. It has its own little timeline or like whatever. But so they were probably like, well, we need to let people ride the Millennium Falcon. But if this was like the original trilogy, Han Solo would never let some random guy fly his Falcon. But if it's like, current timeline, Chewie can loan it to Hondo, and Hondo doesn't give a crap. He'll let whoever fly it. I'm wondering how much of that had to do with it. Because it's like, okay, well, that thematically, story-wise, makes more sense that Hondo would let a rando fly his ship and Han Solo wouldn't. But it's also probably, just that's what was in theaters at the time. And that's what they did the marketing around. But it's a lot.
I feel like
it's interesting
that had to be a big
about.
part. But yeah, I mean, it makes it feel very of its time in that way. That's like, oh, this is a tie-in. It's like specifically between, is it 7? It must be between episodes 8 and 9. It could be between 7 and 8.
It's between 8 and 9.
And so it's locked into this specific release time frame, basically, of these movies.
Except for like,
all
some
the
of the characters that are walking
in.
around, like Mando is walking around, Ahsoka's walking around, whatever.
Yeah.
But like the world itself is set into that time.
If you want original trilogy, you have to go over to Star Tours.
I did that too. Yeah. Oh yeah. So.
That's the classic OG ride.
I didn't mean to derail us to Disney World. I apologize, but
I did actually have another sort of like a retailer perspective question I did want to ask Rich, and
go for it.
I was wondering what your thoughts are on their, because I mean, Asmodee sells a lot of games at, like, you see them at Target, at Walmart and stuff nowadays. It's really, I mean, maybe less neat for you, but as a general person, I think it's kind of neat to see sort of like nerdier board games showing up in these big box stores. And in the past, like Fantasy Flight has sold X-Wing and Destiny at Target and Walmart. But they did during one of their more recent streams say that for the time being, at least, they're planning on only selling to, like local game stores and stuff. They don't want to sell in big box retailers or even, like big box online retailers like Amazon and stuff.
Well, I mean, okay. Well, it's super complicated. Overall, I think it's a good thing, much like you, to see those games in those places, because like it's like the gateway anyway. Like you. I mean, a lot of people are never going to walk in an LGS, so this kind of doesn't matter. But the super nerd, like the guys sitting here, who let's say you found a Star Wars card game or a Legion piece or something, right, at Walmart. Like the way you guys are, you're going to try to take that to the next level. You're like, where can I play this, right? And
well, that's exactly what happened with the Decipher card game. I found when I was 12 when that came out. I found that the 2-player starter set at Walmart.
Yep. I remember that.
I was all like, what is this? Oh my god. And then I bought it, and then I started hunting down cards wherever else I could get them. So
I mean, the negative for the positive for those guys, it's hard to resist. Like, it's hard to resist Amazon because they're going to buy a crap load. The negative with Amazon is, whatever rules you try to set in place go out the window because Amazon's rules take over. So this is why you see these conflicts over, like, Asmodee has a MAP, a minimum advertised price. We're not supposed to sell any product below, 20%. Well, Amazon doesn't care, and so once you're in bed with Amazon's those rules sort of take over. So even if you have this great intention to this map, like what'll happen, these crack me up. We'll get this email then every once in a while from Asmodee, and it'll be like, hey, we're taking a map holiday. And it's like, you're not taking a map holiday. Amazon just doesn't care, and so you're calling it a map holiday, which is, again, it's all fine. Like, it is. It really is. I think access to stuff is better than not having access to stuff. The flip side, not to keep, and I don't want to harp on Lorcana as the example of everything wrong all the time, but they're just so easy. And frankly, I love Lorcana. It's a really good game, and I still think if we can get printing up, that it just gives a chance to get more players in than any card game since the original Pokemon, and that will help Star Wars Unlimited and every other game. But if you're going to say, oh, we want to support organized play, we really want to build this game up, we want to make sure people can play the game, and then you're not able to print enough. I mean, frankly, that stuff should have all gone to stores, and I know one response is like, well, yeah, you were getting $10 plus a pack. No, I don't. This would have helped lower the pack price for one thing, and take like the example at my shop. I had the first 4 weeks the game was out. We limited to 6-pack purchases. We limited to 1 starter deck, and we started organized play the week after release. We ran it for a month straight. We got over 30 unique names of people who came and played organized play and things like that. Then we ran out of booster packs. 2 weeks later, 2 people showed up. As soon as it's just funny. As soon as there was no product, it was like there was nothing. Nobody was interested anymore. And I mean, it was just such a hard crash. But regardless, that the point being that had I had more packs, it was a pretty clear demonstration of they would have accomplished their goal better. So it's really, I mean, so some of it is just like, what are they trying to support? If it's at Walmart, but I can get it, great. If it's at Walmart, but I can't get it, but your messaging is we want everybody to be able to play and build a community, then I don't then you're lying. So, someone's lying somewhere, or 2 different people are not talking to each other. Maybe nobody's lying, but they're not communicating with each other. Does that make sense? So that's my general thought, is like, I'm absolutely pro it all being at big box. Big box can do things that an LGS can never do, and that's good for the game. And if it's good for the game, it's ultimately going to be good for me, and it's going to be good for players. But if you just be honest and consistent. So
I think it's an interesting point too.
Ravensburger, don't play this podcast to a Ravensburger employee. They're doing their best. They just can't get the printers.
I'm pretty sure they've heard worse.
Yeah,
they make Star Wars Villainous, or just the Villainous series in general. That game's cool.
Yeah, they do a great job. They make a lot of great games. Lorcana's a great game. It's just, but yeah, anyway, what were you, sorry, Kurt, go ahead.
Well, you make an interesting point too about it being bigger than one game too, because if people get into one card game, they might, if Star Wars Unlimited is their first card game, they might get into Magic or something after this too, if they just like, ooh, I like a different card game maybe, or they might start with Star Wars Unlimited and then like get into Star Wars minis games too. So like you can kind of like really build a lot bigger thing out of that if it really hits right with people. So
it's that 80-20 thing. 20% of the buyers ultimately are going to be 80% of the market. That's just the way everything works. And so to some degree, it's like prospecting for gold when you put stuff in Amazon, because you're trying to filter for those players who are going to become lifelong buyers rather than just like the one-time purchase or whatever. So
I'm wondering, and this is something I know you won't be able to have a solid answer on because the game doesn't come out until March. But if you had to guess, how do you think Star Wars Unlimited will do, either as sales-wise, community-wise, or whatever, compared to all of the games that are currently big right now, which I don't... Lorcana, Magic, Universes, Yu-Gi-Oh? ? I don't know a lot about what's hot right now.
Yeah, Flesh and Blood, One Piece,
My Hero
Vampire
Academia,
Rivals,
One Piece, Digimon, Grand Archives.
How do you think
My Hero Academia, something like that?
that's the Universes one?
UFS.
Yep. What is your prediction on how Star Wars Unlimited is going to hold up in this marketplace? based on what you've seen so far?
You're gonna hate my answer because, so I've been in retail for 30 years. I just had my 30th anniversary. So most of my life has been driven by anxiety and low self-esteem issues. And so a lot of that was, back in the day was like, if we had 20 people at one tournament, if we didn't have 21 people at the next tournament, I was convinced the sky was falling and everybody hated me and I'd screwed everything up. And not the fact that they might have just gone on vacation or were at the Bison game or something. That was just not how my mind worked. But the point is, the prediction game is it's so tough, and it's really tough for me post 2020. It's everything has changed. Nothing has changed, and everything's different. Is kind of like the best way I like that I keep seeing it or thinking about it, right? And there are things that outperform 2020 and there are things that way underperform 2020. It just really all depends, in the card game or in the game market, as a good example, like board gamers are like the most still won't come out of their house to participate in a group activity, which is fine. They're probably the smartest people among us, let's face it. But so every group acts a little bit differently. So I just don't know. I mean, I really don't. Like, you guys go to local game stores, like what is your crowd at those today versus what it was 4 years ago? What is the steam out there, for this game? The one thing that we know, and I'm going to bet on this game. I'll tell you what, that Paradox is going to bet on this game. We're going to buy pretty big as long as allocations don't, make that statement irrelevant. And it's because I've been in Star Wars card games. I posted this in one of our Facebook groups. God, I've been in Star Wars card games since the year I opened, or like within a year and a half of me opening. They've always been great. I consider it like part of my store. Like, there are other stores now that run the minis games and all that kind of jazz, but I still always, at my heart, it's one of my favorite things to do. There are very few things I like more than having Magic players, Star Wars players, and Star Wars players in my shop, especially card games. I'm a card game guy. Sorry, guys. And so we're definitely going to do what we've always done. And like Leo said, when Destiny launched, it launched great. I don't know, though, if that group who did that still is interested in the game, in a card game, in the way they were even 4, 5, 6 years ago.
I don't even know if half of them are even in town anymore, unfortunately.
Yep, so then we need replacement players. And this is what I was going to say. We need replacement players, and what we ultimately need is we need young players. When you go to your local shop, tell me how many young players you see in anything, not anecdotally. Don't tell me like the one guy who brought his kid the one time, right? Like, just on a regular basis, how many kids do you see, or teenagers or whatever, right? So I have no idea. And that was kind of my point when I was talking to Dan about like where Star Wars stands as a franchise. Are there enough 20-year-olds who give a crap about Star Wars overall, to fill the ranks of those people that we've lost to just age, and they're not all dead. Sorry, all old Star Wars players. So
we're gonna have a moment of silence for them at the end of the show.
So what's my prediction? My prediction is it will be okay. I cannot see a world where no one shows up for my first pre-release. Like, I just don't see that. I don't see a world.
You've got Leo, and he's still buying CCG, so
yeah. But if I only have Leo, then it's no good for Leo either. Like, that was one reason that I bowed out of a lot of the recent smaller card games, even though I love card game players. Absolutely love card game players, and I love card games. But I have seen people waste a lot of money on a card game that 18 months later was totally dead, World of Warcraft, or 100 other games. And so I just didn't want to buy in. I missed out on some launches. I regret Flesh and Blood a little bit. I regret One Piece a little bit and things like that. But but then I would have also had to do all the other ones that may not have worked as well. Right. Yeah. So, as an older,
I suppose there's like cost benefit, like as far as like shelf space and stuff goes for you, is like,
Yeah,
am I
well,
going to
if you bring in
store space to
Backroom
this game,
space too.
or
and if you bring in My
or could I
Hero
have more magic?
Academia, you bring in My Hero Academia, and the 6 people in town who want to play it, or 12, or whatever the number is, if they've got everything they want, and you have extra booster boxes, you literally have no one to sell them to, right? Like, there's nothing you can do with them. So, like, that was one of the things we always found that was a big problem. Is even with Destiny, as soon as we had extra Destiny boxes, we couldn't do anything with them. Like, if you guys had everything, we were screwed. We couldn't sell them to anyone. So
the problem we also ran into is we all talked to each other. So there was 6 legendary cards per box, and so like we pretty much knew when all 6 legendaries would get bought out of the box you had open.
Sure.
And then none of us would want to buy anymore because we're like, well, we know we're not going to pull the legendary, so we would all sit around and wait for like suckers who didn't know any better to buy up the last packs out of the box, and then you crack a new one, and then we would come in and buy some more again.
Oh, that's really smart. Can't blame you for that. I'll blame FFG for that one.
Well, I mean, I think, do you guys have any other questions for Rich here?
I think we ended up hitting everything kind of naturally.
Yeah,
I always hope I didn't say anything stupid or boring. I mean, I just like.
No. It was great. It was really great having you on, Rich. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I'm glad we finally found time to make this work and have you on and chat about Unlimited.
Yeah, this was really great, fantastic. I enjoyed all of your insight into everything.
Yeah,
it's
for
just,
sure. It's a different perspective than we have as players, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah, and when I was 23 and opened my store, I really wasn't a store owner. I was just like a comic book reader and ultimately a card player. And I spent like 10 years. That was all I cared about. I don't think I really learned, because like there's a whole thing about the whole business side too, like distributors and manufacturers and printers and shippers and all that stuff that I think I'm getting down a little bit. Like, I've got a friend in a distributor and he's under an NDA, so he tells me nothing, but he's the buyer for Wizards of the Coast, for the largest distributor in the world. And it's really interesting, so he'll ask me questions every once in a while about store level things or whatever, but he can't ever tell me anything. So it's not even there's no point to having this friend. Except that I've been able to sort of glimpse like the problems that layer into everything, at every level. That, like, I mean, last thing, like comic guys, they've had to, it's the same thing with gamers too. But like comic guys, all the trash, all the garbage that happens behind the scenes in the comic industry is all public now, right? Like back in the day, we could hide it from you guys, but not anymore, right? If there's a distributor war, if there's trash talking in the retailers, it doesn't matter, right? It's all everywhere. And I just think that that's a really unfortunate thing, because like you should just be able to be like, I just want to come buy my whatever, and shouldn't ever even know about that stuff. Should be an illusion. It should be, it should just seem like a mystical perfect thing that happens for you,
Just come in once a month and pick up my Transformers and my Spider-Man.
Yeah. Yep. So
yeah, so I thanks again for coming on, Rich. Thanks for taking time tonight to talk to us.
Oh, do you want to give a little plug too for the store and your
podcast or anything you got? Any events coming up? Because we do have a fair number of listeners in the FM area. So
yeah, well, I mean, we just wrapped up. I mean, 30 years. Just wrapped up our last. We kind of did 30th anniversary stuff all throughout the whole year. We had Chris Claremont, X-Men writer for 17 years, over Free Comic Book Day. It was our first guest we've ever had, so that was a lot of fun. Except that he wouldn't shut up, so it took way longer. No, and it's funny to complain about a guest you bring in who wouldn't shut up, except that like when you have like 200 people in line and he's spending like 10 minutes with each person, you just start doing the math and you're like, this is not going well. But that was a lot of fun, and I learned stuff that I didn't know. I mean, the biggest thing I could plug for Paradox is just, we we're a place, we do a big Black Friday sale. We're starting that the 20th through the 25th, so 25% off everything. I can tell your JodoCast listeners that our doorbusters on actual Black Friday are going to be the same as last year, which is that was our day that we put all board games on sale for buy two, get one free. But no one knows that but you guys. Literally has never been said anywhere. So there you go. Yeah, so that's
exclusive.
Yeah, scoop. And then, after that, I mean, I don't know, working on our 2024 plans and see where that year takes us. Year 31. Now I have no idea what to do. So it was fun all year. Like as a marketer all year, I could just what is this thing? Oh, I'll just call it a 30th anniversary event. Now I have to come up with, what is it going to be next year? I don't know. So.
Awesome. Well, everybody, if you are, within 12 hours drive of Fargo, North Dakota, check out Paradox Comics and Cards and hit up those sales and all that stuff. Rich, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks again, Leo and Kurt, as always, for joining us. Everybody else, thanks for listening. Check us out on Patreon or our Discord or whatever. You can find those links on our website, jodocast.com. And tell us, leave a comment wherever you are, even if you're not on a JodoCast thing. You're just
say it out loud to anyone around you.
Yeah, tap somebody on the bus, be like, hey, I'm excited about Star Wars Unlimited. Leave a comment somewhere of how you feel about Star Wars Unlimited.
Hey,
leave a comment on a news article somewhere.
I'll say this about you guys. When you first were going to do the JodoCast, I just was like, what are they talking about? But, it's 10 years. Not because I didn't like you guys. I think you're doing good, but I had no idea what podcasting was and didn't understand it. You've done it for 10 years. That's amazing, gentlemen. One of my things when people say, give us business advice is whether you like it or not, you got to open the door every day. If you say you're open at 10 a.m., that door needs to be open at 10 a.m. So if you're going to podcast once a week, that takes a lot of effort. And I hope people give you money through Patreon and other methods because you guys totally deserve it. I'll say that. So
yeah, listen to Rich, everybody.
It's hard.